Jai Shri Radhe. Shri Vallabhadisha ki jai. Shri Govardhana ji ki jai. Shri Yamuna Maharani ji ki jai ho. Sabhi Vaishnavon ko Jai Shri Krishna. Jai Jai Shri Radhe. Today is the 27th day of our readings, and we commence with part 4 of Varta 14, the story of Narayan Das Brahmachari. One day Narayan Das, after dressing and adorning the Lord, was just about to offer some freshly cooked rice pudding. Suddenly a Vaishnava came running up and told him that Sri Acharyaji was in Gokul. Narayan Das filled a bowl with the steaming hot kheer and quickly offered it before going to Gokul to see Sri Acharyaji. Sri Acharyaji was heading for Mahavan, and Narayan Das met him on the road, so he bowed low before him. Sri Acharyaji asked Narayan Das where Sri Thakurji was up to in the day's service. Narayan Das said that he had made an offering as he was dressing Sri Thakurji, but that he had left to come to see him. Sri Acharyaji immediately got ready to leave to go to Narayan Das's place. He straightway bathed and entered into the temple. He was going to fill the water jug when he saw Sri Gokul Chandramaji's hands, which he had pulled behind his back, were covered in kheer, as were his seat and clothes. Sri Acharyaji asked him why he was clasping his hands, and he explained that Narayan Das had put the bowl of very hot kheer there and then left, that he had picked up the bowl and it was very hot, so he had quickly pulled his hands away and then licked his fingers, whereby his lips and hands were scorched and very red. Sri Acharyaji cooled the kheer with a fan and offered it again. He came out of the temple and angrily admonished Narayan Das for offering such hot rice pudding to the Lord. Narayan Das replied that when he heard that Sri Acharyaji was arriving, he had offered it in a rush. Sri Acharyaji told him never to behave like this again. When Narayan Das, Bhav Prakash, in a meaning, when Narayan Das heard that Sri Acharyaji was coming, he forgot himself. He thought that if the rice pudding was too hot, then Sri Thakurji would cool it down before eating it. But it was not the correct path to be inattentive to the Seva for the sake of seeing Sri Acharyaji. Sri Gokul Chandramaji ate the kheer just as Narayan Das had offered it, and thus suffered the scorching of his hands. It is offensive to make Seva in a hurry, whether it be adornment or food offerings. For sure, Narayan Das's mind was fixed on the divine activity of going to visit Sri Acharyaji, but in doing so he caused Sri Thakurji so much trouble. What to speak of rushing off for some worldly activity? When one is performing Seva, one must keep one's mind fixed in the moment. Also, this story reveals the inner meaning of kheer, for it represents Sri Swaminiji, as does the period of Seva when Sri Thakurji is getting dressed up. Seeing the kheer, Sri Thakurji was therefore very anxious to touch it straight away. It is important to test its temperature before offering. This is the principle revealed here. After this, Sri Acharyaji offered Sri Thakurji water and a face towel, followed by the fragrant pan leaves before bringing out the prasad. Sri Gokul Chandramaji grabbed hold of both of Sri Acharyaji's hands, saying, "You must eat this kheer Mahaprasad." Sri Acharyaji replied that he should keep his dharma of not accepting Sakari Prasad from a lower caste member, but Sri Gokul Chandramaji insisted that he partake. From that day to this, in order to avoid any such controversy, kheer, despite its method of preparation and ingredients, is counted as a preparation within the Anasakari category. Sri Gokul Chandramaji insisted in this way in order to teach the principle that kheer should never be stigmatized amongst devotees. Now kheer is counted as Anasakari. Sri Thakurji can be offered and will accept Anasakari preparations at any time and not just on festival days. If it were kept as a festival offering, then he would only get to have it on festival days. But he loves kheer unhesitatingly. A devotee should not wait for a festival in order to offer it. It can be made whenever. Part 5. In this way, Narayan Das did a lot of service. Then he became old and feeble. One day, Sri Thakurji told him to ask for something. Narayan Das requested him to go to Sri Gosaiji's home and be served there. His feeling was that Sri Gokul Chandramaji could be very happy if served in Sri Gosaiji's home. Sri Gokul Chandramaji was very pleased that Narayan Das only thought of his happiness and had not asked for anything for himself. Soon after, Narayan Das's niece dropped her mortal coils, and soon after that so did he. For some days afterwards, Sri Gokul Chandramaji stayed with Krishna Das Swami, an associate of Narayan Das in Mahavan and disciple of Sri Gosaiji. Bhav Prakash. In the eternal Leela, this Krishna Das Swami was Narayan Das's Sakhi, named Mridubeni. Hence the Lord accepted her seva for some days. Afterwards, Sri Gokul Chandramaji came to Sri Gosaiji's home in Mathura. This story shows the depth of his regulated lifestyle. He was able to give away his own portion of Mahaprasad, and he did not ask Sri Thakurji for any reward for himself. Exclusively considering the Lord's happiness is the fundamental way of the path of grace. Thus concludes Varta 14, the story of Narayan Das, although truly there is no end to his tale. Now we enter Varta 15, the story of one Kshatriya lady who lived in Mahavan, Ek Kshatrani, the inner meaning. In the eternal Leela, this Kshatrani is Sri Swaminiji's close Sakhi named Bhadra. She was born into a Kshatriya family. She was only 11 years old when her parents decided to get her married off. The Kshatrani told her parents that they had better not do this because the day that she got married, her husband and they would most definitely die. So they kept quiet. When she got to the age of 13, people in their society began to criticize those parents, and they arranged her engagement to someone. The day of the wedding came round, and as the couple went round the sacred fire, the husband and the parents all died. After that, she lived all alone in the house. None of her fellow villagers or relatives would even speak to her, because they feared that if they had any affection for her, then they too would perish. But one day Sri Acharyaji came to Narayan Das's home, and the Kshatrani caught sight of him. She was a pure soul, and so she immediately knew that she should take shelter in him. She bowed low before Sri Acharyaji and begged him to initiate her now that all her worldly ties had been broken. He initiated her with the Lord's name and Brahma Sambandh. She asked him what her duties now were. Sri Acharyaji told her that her duty was now to serve the Lord. The Kshatrani replied, "In the Leela, I had always been your servant. Sri Acharyaji is here equated with Sri Swaminiji, and Sri was her Sakhi. You have now told me that I should serve the Lord. Many people do such seva, but your feet are very hard to find. Please do not ask me to do any other service than to serve you. Then I can always be close to you and able to see you. I take shelter in your feet alone." Sri Acharyaji was very happy to hear her words and said, "What you say is true, but I have to go off on my holy grace pilgrimage now. Since you are a lady, I cannot take you with me." Sri Acharyaji put kumkum, or red powder, on his feet and made his footprints on a piece of cloth which he gave to her and asked her to serve. "I am very pleased with you, and all of your spiritual desires will come true." The Kshatrani brought Sri Acharyaji to her home, where she served him as if he were Sri Swaminiji. He granted her many divine experiences. Then he set off on his tour, first going to Varanasi. One day the Kshatrani went to the banks of Yamunaji at Brahman Ghat to fetch water in Aparas. She was putting her water vessel into the three Yamunaji's water when she saw, in the very shallow water, 4 deities or swarupas of the Lord. She spoke to them. "Oh, you are most beautiful. What are you doing here in the water?" The deities replied, "Please take us home with you. In a few days' time, Sri Acharyaji will return, and then you should give us to him." The Kshatrani said, "I will go home and ask Sri Acharyaji first, before I take you there." She picked up her water vessel and hurried home. She asked Sri Acharyaji, in her seva, whether it would be all right for her to bring home the 4 swarupas who were on the riverbank. Sri Acharyaji told her to very quickly bring them home. She did so, took them into her temple, dressed them with some cloth, and offered them some preparations to eat. The Kshatrani's attachment was for Sri Acharyaji, not so much for Sri Thakurji's seva. Still, the 4 swarupas had come to her of their own accord. The teaching here is that when a Vaishnava sincerely serves Sri Acharyaji, then Sri Thakurji will automatically come to them without their even having to try. Sri Acharyaji was in Varanasi, but he came to know all of this. He set out from there to come to Vraj, stopping in Adel on the way. Then he went to Kara. In Kara there was a Kshatriya man named Devakpur. He lived close by to Gadadhar Das. One day some Vaishnavas had come to his house to take Mahaprasad. Devakpur, whose house was a little taller than Gadadhar Das, saw the latter serving out the prasad, but he also espied Sri Thakurji sitting in the group taking prasad. Seeing this, Devakpur fainted. It took him an hour or so to come round, after which He came to Gadadhar Das and asked him where all the Vaishnavas had gone. Gadadhar Das replied that they had all gone home after taking prasad. Devakpur explained to him that he had seen Sri Thakurji enjoying prasad amongst the Vaishnavas and that this scene had caused him to faint. Now, he said, I want to see that scene again and see Sri Thakurji again. Gadadhar Das agreed that he was very lucky to have seen the Lord, but that it was uncertain when that would happen again. Devakpur begged him to think of a plan. I have wasted all my life, he said. I really need to meet the Lord. Gadadhar Das said that he should go and see Sri Acharyaji and dedicate his life to him alone. For it was by his grace that a jiva could meet with the Lord in this lifetime, and he reassured him that it could happen to him. He told Devakpur that Sri Acharyaji had just left Varanasi and that he would be arriving in 3 or 4 days. After that, Devakpur came every day to Gadadhar Das and asked if Sri Acharyaji had arrived yet. In this way, his desire to Sri Acharyaji became stronger and stronger. He forgot all about his duties at home. In 3 or 4 days, Sri Acharyaji arrived in Kara. Devakpur approached him, bowed low to him, and requested him to accept him as a disciple. Gadadhar Das told Sri Acharyaji about the experience that Devakpur had had, and that he had seen the Lord amongst the Vaishnavas, and that he was a divine soul. Sri Acharyaji initiated him with the Lord's name, and then Brahma Sambandha. What should I do now? He asked. Sri Acharyaji told him to travel to Vraja with him, where he would give him a Sri Thakurji to serve. Devakpur left his wife at home and went on the trip. After this, Sri Acharyaji moved on to Agra, where Gajan Dhawan lived. Gajan Dhawan's father was very wealthy. He had 4 sons, out of whom Gajan was the youngest. At home there was Gajan's mother, but none of the sons were married. Gajan's father decided to stage a dance show on a boat. Gajan was there with his brothers, and there were about 50 or 70 guests. The show went on until the middle of the night, when the boat suddenly split in 2, throwing everyone into the water. Gajan grabbed onto a piece of the broken boat, and he came ashore, still holding onto it, about 8 miles from Agra. Morning came, and Gajan managed to get home, where he told his mother the terrible news. His mother decided to commit sati and burnt herself on her husband's funeral pyre. Gajan was now alone. He gave up all forms of business and used to just go and sit for hours on the banks of Sri Yamunaji. Then he would go home and also just sit there. He didn't really speak to anyone and thus became quite renounced. He just thought, well, my fathers and brothers are all dead, and I too will soon die. What should I do now? If the Lord graces me, then only will I be all right. In this way he pulled back from material life. There was also one Kshatriya gent named Jiyadas Suri who lived in Agra. When he was 60, he became the superintendent of police in Agra, and he controlled the town. One day there was an argument between a Brahmin lady and a Shudra. The Shudra had taken money from the Brahmin lady and did not return it. The Brahmani called in Jiyadasji to solve the case, but the Shudra offered him a bribe to swing it in his favour. Jiyadasji, out of greed, had the Brahmin lady falsely accused and the Shudra released. The Brahmin lady was very distressed. Jiyadas soon after contracted leprosy, and his whole body was affected. He was a divine soul, and he then realised his mistake. He regretted having put a wrong accusation on that lady. He began to deem the job as police chief as very detrimental, so he retired from it. He called the Brahmin lady over and said, "Oh, mother, I was very greedy, and so I had you falsely accused. Please now take back the money that was owed to you from me with interest. I know that it is because of this that I am suffering this condition." He paid back her money with interest and gave her a little bit extra too. She blessed him. Then he renounced his previous lifestyle and went to sit on the banks of the Sri Yamunaji river. He would only go home in the evening to eat. After some time, he was cured of the leprosy. One day, Gajan Dhawan and Jiyadas both happened to be sitting in the same place on the riverbank. They began to converse. Gajan told him all about how his father and all his brothers were drowned, and his mother had become sati, or died on her husband's funeral pyre, and that all of this had been the stimulus for his renunciation. Jiyadas also told him about how he had been unjust in the case of the Brahmin lady, and that as a result he had become leprous. This had made him realize the error of his ways, and now he simply desired to meet the Lord. Gajan stated that it was also his wish, but that he didn't know how this could come about. The Lord can only be met through the blessing of some great soul, he concluded. Jiyadas agreed, but interjected that he was a most sinful person, so how would he ever get to meet such a soul. I have, he said, therefore taken shelter in Sri Yamanaji and the Lord. Whatever fate they grant me, so be it. In this way, the two of them used to meet and discuss. So we will take a rest from the recitation for today, and tomorrow we will carry on with the story of Ek Kshatrani. Aaj ke Anand ki jai. Jai Shri Radhe. Shri Vallabhadesh ki jai. Shri Gosaiji Paramadayalave ki jai. And Jai Jai Shri Radhe.